In my last video, I talked about how you receive a diagnosis and perhaps the best way to handle it if you could do it again. But this time I'd like to talk about chemotherapy. What exactly is it, how it affects you, and how perhaps you can handle it the best way you can. I'm not a clinician, so I can only talk about how I handled it personally. But as I had to have cancer treatment twice, I think I worked out for me what the best way forward was. So let's start with chemotherapy. What exactly is it? Well, if you have the kind of cancer that needs treatment with chemotherapy, then that's it. You're going to take the drugs. You don't have to, but I opted for the science because I know it works. Chemotherapy are anti-cancer drugs or cytotoxic drugs. Basically, they stop the way cancer cells reproduce, but they also affect healthy cells too, which means there can be some pretty horrid side effects. But for me, the biggest side effect of chemotherapy was the thought that I might lose my hair. But I'll come on to that later. So I've just had the diagnosis that I've got cancer, and if that wasn't bad enough, then they say, have the operation, then after that you have chemotherapy. Well, that was almost as bad as hearing I had cancer. I have to have chemotherapy? But the thing we've all heard about chemotherapy is that it makes you feel terrible and you lose your hair. And both of those things for men and women, I don't know, I think the hair loss was the biggest thing for me. So I went to my chemotherapy nurse and I said, everyone says that with chemotherapy you lose your hair. You don't always, do you? Because, oh no, it depends on the drugs. You don't always lose your hair. And I said, well, on the drugs that I'm going to have for my cancer, will I lose my hair? Oh yeah, definitely. I said, are you sure? Yeah. I said, all of it? Yeah. And I said, so like roughly when will I lose it? She goes, about 19 days after your first chemotherapy session. I went, okay. So I went home and my auntie Sheila had bought me some holy water from Lourdes in France. And I thought, well, maybe St. Bernadette can help me here. And I poured the whole bottle of holy water over my head and just thought, maybe my hair won't fall out now. Anyway, I'll come on to that in a minute. So chemotherapy, it's administered it's through an infusion, but it's administered either in hospital or at home. I had no idea that you could have chemotherapy at home. But when I had cancer the first time round, I was on private medical care, which meant I had an option. So I said, well, of course I'd like to have chemotherapy here. Yes, please. So what was great about chemotherapy, if anything can be great about it, was that I arranged to have my chemotherapy sessions at around 3 o'clock, which meant by the time my kids got home from school, they could all sit round with me and my chemo nurse and all the drips, and we could have our afternoon tea together. What that meant was that the scariness of the thought of chemotherapy for my kids was no longer scary. It was just something Mum had to go through because it was going to make her feel better. The second time round, when I had to have my chemotherapy, that was 5 years later, I wasn't on my private medical cover, but I had to go into hospital to have chemotherapy. And for me, that didn't feel as comfortable or as comforting. So definitely, if I had had the choice, I would have had it at home. But I know from talking to a lot of other people, they didn't want to have the whole chemotherapy thing at home. They wanted to be out of their home. So whatever suits you, but I love the fact that I could actually be at home with the kids watching it because I didn't want my kids to be scared about any of this. So what happens when you have the chemotherapy? Well, about an hour or two after I'd had my first ever chemotherapy session, I sort of sat down and waited to internally combust because I didn't know what was going to happen. But actually, I felt no different. And in fact, I felt no different after the first couple of sessions of chemotherapy. I started to feel a bit more rubbish after that. But first I thought, well, maybe it's not so bad. And in fact, I carried on going into work. I took a couple of days off when I had the chemotherapy sessions, but that's all. And I carried on working throughout. But one thing that did happen, my chemotherapy, was exactly 19 days after the first session. As my chemotherapy nurse had said, I started to lose my hair. Now, I don't know what losing your hair means or looks like or feels like. But in fact, I was in a meeting with a client for quite a long time, and I hadn't really noticed very much. But when I got back to my car, I think I just flicked my my head, because I had longish hair, and I thought something was moving behind me. And I looked behind me, and on my headrest and behind me in the car was my hair. It had started to fall out. Now, I've always had a full head of hair, but loads had been falling out, I guess, on my journey to my clients. So I raced back to work. I opened the door, shouted up to everybody in the office, "My hair's falling out, I'm going home." And that's what I did. I went home and I started to touch my hair, and bits of hair were coming out, and there was a lot of hair. So I just tied my hair up in a turban to keep it in one place, and made an appointment to have my hair cut. I had my hair cut short the next day, sort of Annie Lennox short, but to be quite frank, it really wasn't short enough because I was still losing loads of hair. So the next thing I did was I actually sat my kids down and said, "Mummy's going to lose her hair. Would you like to help me lose all of it now, and I'll wear a wig?" So I'm not sure whether this was a good thing for them or a bad thing for them, or whether it made me feel better, but I also asked all of them to help me shave my head, and they did. I don't think they enjoyed it, but I thought I should involve them in it. I'm still not sure if that was the right thing to do. Anyway, we shaved my hair off, and then the next thing to do was to cover it, because I really didn't fancy being bald. I'd taken the precaution of going to a couple of wig shops and selecting a wig that I thought suited me really well. And I had a trial run. I'd been out to a restaurant with my kids and my sister and her husband. We tried the wig out, and I actually felt great with the wig on. So I knew that when I went into work, I'd be able to put the wig on. But when I saw myself bald for the first time, I did shed a few tears, because that wasn't me. All of a sudden, there was nothing to hide behind. It was just me. And then when I eventually lost my eyebrows and my eyelashes, there was really just eyes with dark shadows because I wasn't sleeping, and me. And I didn't like it. But with my wig, I felt $1 million. And in fact, it took me no time to get ready for work in the mornings, because I had good hair day every single day. One other thing that's important to know about chemotherapy, certainly from my experiences, was that it's important to keep your head busy. I was at work, so there were always things going on, and I almost didn't notice that I wasn't thinking about how I felt, or that I had a chemotherapy session coming up. But second time round, 5 years later, when I had chemotherapy again, I thought I should take it easier, be easier on myself, and maybe not work so hard. But then I dwelled more on what was happening to me, my body, how I felt. I was feeling rubbish. And then 3 days after every single chemotherapy session, I just burst into tears. If you ask me how I was, I just burst into tears. What was that about? Post-rationalisation, it was because I didn't have my head busy. If you're not at work, stay at home and tidy your liquor drawer, but do something, because I found certainly for me, it made me feel a whole lot better.